She bought the crumbling hotel for just $5,000, thinking she'd found a desperate solution to keep a roof over her daughter's head. But when Sarah Chen finally forced open the penthouse door that had been sealed for 40 years, what she discovered wasn't just valuable. It was a collection so rare, so perfectly preserved, that Christie's valued it at $180 million. And the truth behind it would expose the town's darkest secret. The rain hammered against the courthouse windows as Sarah Chen counted the crumpled bills one more time. $4,812. Every penny she'd saved from 3 years of double shifts at the machine shop, plus what she'd gotten from selling her mother's wedding ring. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold October morning, but from what she was about to do. Next item. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the half-empty room. The old Grandview Hotel on Elm Street. Starting bid is $5,000. Sarah's heart sank. She was short by $188. She'd have to watch someone else claim the only chance she had at giving her daughter Emma a real home. The silence stretched. No paddles rose. The auctioneer shifted uncomfortably. Anyone? The Grandview Hotel? $5,000? Still nothing. The locals knew better. That building had been rotting on Elm Street for 4 decades, its windows dark, its grand entrance chained shut. Stories swirled about why the top floor was sealed, why the previous owners had vanished overnight in 1983, leaving everything behind. "I'll take it for $4,800, Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the silence. The auctioneer's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, the minimum is $5,000. "That's all I have," she said simply. $4,812, every cent. Murmurs rippled through the room. The auctioneer looked at the city clerk, who shrugged. After 40 years of decay, they just wanted it off the books. Going once, twice, sold to the lady in the back for $4,800. Sarah's knees nearly buckled with relief. She signed the papers with shaking hands, ignoring the pitying looks from the other bidders. They thought she was crazy, a single mom buying a death trap. But they didn't know what it was like to raise a 7-year-old in a mouldy studio apartment above a liquor store, to wake up at 3 in the morning to the sound of fights in the hallway, to see your daughter stuff towels under the door to keep out the cigarette smoke. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in front of the Grandview Hotel with Emma's small hand in hers. The building loomed above them, 5 stories of crumbling Art Deco elegance, paint peeled from the walls like dead skin. Vines strangled the fire escapes, but Sarah saw past all that. She saw thick walls that had survived decades of neglect, a stone foundation that hadn't shifted, and most importantly, 60 rooms that could become apartments, real homes for families like hers. "It's scary, Mama," Emma whispered. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "Only on the outside, baby. We're going to make it beautiful again." The front door groaned as Sarah turned the key. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, streaming through broken windows. The lobby still held traces of grandeur, a chandelier hanging crooked but intact, marble floors beneath layers of grime, carved wooden pillars that had somehow escaped the termites. They spent the first week camping in the old manager's office behind the front desk. Sarah had running water in 1 bathroom and had rigged up electricity to 3 rooms. Each morning, she'd walk Emma to school, then return to attack another section of the hotel clearing debris, patching roof leaks, learning through YouTube videos and sheer determination how to replace wiring and fix pipes. The work was backbreaking, but it was theirs. No more landlords, no more rent increases, no more apologizing for existing. It was on the 10th day that Sarah noticed something odd. She was on the 4th floor, checking for structural damage, when she realized the elevator shaft went higher than it should. The building had 5 floors, but the elevator had a button for 6, painted over, but still visible if you looked closely. She found the service stairs narrow and dark, tucked behind a maintenance closet. They led up to a heavy door marked "Private." no entry. Chains wrapped around the handles, the locks rusted but solid. Someone had really wanted this floor to stay closed. Sarah told herself to leave it alone. She had enough work with the rest of the building, but the question gnawed at her. Why seal an entire floor? What were they hiding? The mystery pulled at her during the day as she worked and kept her awake at night. 2 weeks later, she finally gave in. Armed with bolt cutters and a crowbar, she attacked the chains. They fought back, 40 years of rust making them stubborn, but eventually they gave way with a shriek of protesting metal. The door swung inward, revealing a pristine hallway. No dust, no decay, as if time had stopped the moment those chains went on. Sarah's flashlight beam swept across wallpaper that should have been rotting but wasn't, carpet that should have been moth-eaten but looked freshly vacuumed. At the end of the hall, double doors stood open to the penthouse suite. She moved forward slowly, every instinct screaming that this was wrong. Buildings didn't preserve themselves. Abandoned places didn't stay clean. The air smelled different here, filtered, sterile, like a museum. But as she stepped into the penthouse, her flashlight found the answer. Climate control units hummed quietly in the corners, dehumidifiers, air filtration, all connected to a separate power source that had been running for 4 decades. Someone had turned this floor into a vault. But a vault for what? The penthouse was enormous, taking up the entire top floor. The main room opened onto a terrace with views across the whole town, but it was the walls that made Sarah's breath catch. Paintings, dozens of them, each in its own climate-controlled case, each lit by specialized bulbs that had somehow never burned out. The cases were museum-grade, the kind she'd only seen on field trips to major galleries. She moved closer, reading the small plaques. Monet, Picasso, Vermeer. Names she recognized from the art history class she'd taken before Emma was born, before life got complicated. These couldn't be real. They had to be copies, fakes. Museums owned these paintings. They were worth millions, tens of millions. But as she studied them, she knew they weren't copies. The texture of the paint, the way light played across the surfaces, the preservation systems, everything screamed authenticity. In the dining room, glass cases held sculptures, a bronze that might have been a Rodin, a marble bust that looked Greek, ancient, priceless. Each piece carefully labelled, protected with obsessive care. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank onto a velvet chair that puffed dust despite the climate control. This wasn't just art, this was a fortune. Hundreds of millions of dollars just sitting here, waiting. Her mind raced. Who hid this? Why? And what was she supposed to do now? That's when she saw the letter. It sat on a mahogany desk, in an envelope addressed simply, "To whoever finally opens this door." Sarah's hands trembled as she picked it up. Inside, written in careful script on hotel stationery, was a confession that made her blood run cold. "My name is Vincent Harrington. By the time you read this, I'll be long gone. The art you see here represents my life's greatest shame and my only attempt at redemption. In 1979, I was hired to transport stolen artworks, masterpieces, looted during the Second World War and hidden in private collections. I was young, desperate, and told myself I was just a driver. But when I learned these paintings had been torn from Jewish families who died in camps, I couldn't deliver them. I hid them here instead, told my employers the truck had been hijacked. They hunted me for months. I changed my name, fled the state, left everything behind, but I couldn't leave the art. It deserved to be returned to the families it was stolen from. But I was a coward. I was terrified they'd find me if I tried. So I preserved it. Set up the climate control on a separate grid, paid for its maintenance through a trust that runs out in 2025. I hoped someone braver than me would find it. There's a ledger in the desk. Every piece is documented where it came from, which family owned it. The Holocaust Museum has databases now. You can find the descendants. Please do what I couldn't. Return these treasures to their rightful owners. Let something beautiful come from my cowardice. Vincent Harrington, formerly Marcus Webb. Sarah read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking harder with each reading. She opened the desk drawer and found the ledger thick with photographs, provenance records, and names. The Rothschild collection. The Rosenberg paintings, art that had been considered lost forever. She sat in that penthouse until the sun set, her mind spinning. She'd bought this hotel to save her daughter from poverty. Now she held the keys to a fortune that could transform their lives instantly. One painting, just one, sold quietly, could mean Emma's college paid for, a real house. No more double shifts, no more choosing between groceries and utilities. But those paintings weren't hers. They belonged to families who had lost everything, grandparents murdered, homes destroyed, entire lineages wiped out, except for scattered survivors who had spent 70 years wondering what happened to their heritage. Sarah looked at her phone. Emma would be getting out of after-school care soon. She needed to make a decision. She thought about her daughter's face, the way Emma never complained about their tiny apartment, the way she did homework by candlelight when the power got shut off, the way she pretended not to be hungry when there wasn't enough food for both of them. Then she thought about other daughters decades ago, torn from their homes, their families' treasures stolen along with their lives. She thought about grandchildren now, who had nothing left of their heritage but stories and shadows. The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. Sarah stood, legs unsteady beneath her. She took one last look at the paintings glowing in their cases, at the sculptures that had survived against all odds, at the legacy of pain and preservation that Vincent Harrington had left behind. She thought about Emma waiting at after-school care, about the electric bill sitting unpaid on their kitchen counter, about the life of struggle that stretched endlessly before them. Then she thought about doing what was right, even when it cost everything. Her hand was steady when she pulled out her phone and searched for the Holocaust Museum's contact information. No hesitation, no second-guessing. Just the quiet certainty that some things mattered more than survival. The call connected on the 3rd ring. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said, her voice clear despite the tears running down her face. "I found something you've been looking for." The news hit Millbrook like lightning. Within 48 hours of Sarah's call, the hotel was surrounded by news vans, art experts, and FBI agents. The quiet Pennsylvania town of 8,000 suddenly found itself at the center of an international story. Sarah watched from the lobby as specialists in white gloves carefully removed each piece. Every painting, every sculpture catalogued and verified. A Vermeer that had been missing for 70 years. A Monet from a collection thought burned in the war. "Miss Chen." A woman in a severe black suit approached. "I'm Director Catherine Walsh from the museum. I need you to understand what you've done here." Sarah straightened, expecting criticism. She'd made the call without thinking about legal ramifications. Maybe she should have gotten a lawyer first. "You've just facilitated the largest return of Holocaust-era stolen art in modern history," the director continued. "The combined value is over $180 million. More importantly, you've returned family legacies to people who thought they were lost forever." "What happens to me?" Sarah asked quietly. "I mean, legally. I bought the building, but—" "You're protected under international repatriation law. You did exactly what you should have. In fact," the director paused, "there are provisions for this. Finder's fees, rewards from grateful families, museums that will want to honor you. You won't walk away empty-handed." Sarah shook her head. "I didn't do it for money." "I know," the director smiled. "That's what makes it remarkable." Over the following weeks, the story unfolded. The art was traced to 6 families. The Rosenbergs, whose department store empire had been seized. The Blums, musicians whose instruments and art collection had vanished. The Goldsteins, the Hermans, the Kaplans. Each family had descendants who had spent decades searching. The first family arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Sarah was patching drywall on the second floor when Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, someone's here." An elderly woman stood in the lobby, supported by her grandson, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a photograph. "I'm Ruth Goldstein Meyer," she said. "That painting the landscape with the cottage it hung in my mother's music room. I was 6 when they took it. I used to lie beneath it while she played piano." Sarah didn't know what to say. She just hugged the woman as she sobbed. More families came, each with stories, each with tears. The hotel lobby became a place of reunions, not just with art, but with memory itself. Grandchildren heard stories they'd never been told. Families pieced together histories that had been fractured by violence. But it was the town that surprised Sarah most. Old Margaret from the hardware store showed up with a box of new tools. "Heard you were fixing this place up yourself," she grunted. "These should help." The Kowalski brothers, contractors who'd never given Sarah the time of day at the machine shop, knocked on the door. "We've got some spare lumber. Thought you could use it." Even her boss at the shop, who'd fired her when she'd bought the hotel, can't have employees who don't show up, appeared with a sheepish expression. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Job's yours if you want it. Part-time. Work around your schedule here." The transformation was remarkable. People who had whispered about her financial struggles now spoke of her integrity. The single mother who couldn't afford new shoes for her daughter was now the woman who'd returned $180 million in stolen art. Sarah stood in the hotel lobby that evening, Emma asleep upstairs in what would soon be their apartment. The mockery had transformed into respect, the burden had become a bridge, and the choice she'd made, the hardest choice of her life, had opened doors she'd never imagined. Tomorrow, more families would come. More tears would be shed. More history would be reclaimed. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel what she'd been too afraid to feel before: hope. But it was the 7th visitor who changed everything. Michael Rothschild didn't look like a billionaire. He wore jeans and a faded sweater, drove a rental car, and knocked on the door like anyone else. But Sarah recognized him from the news, the tech mogul whose grandfather had built a retail empire from nothing, only to lose everything in 1938. "3 of those paintings were my family's," he said quietly, "including the Vermeer. My grandmother described them to my mother, who described them to me. I never thought I'd see them." They stood in the empty penthouse, looking out over the town. "What are your plans for the hotel?" he asked. Sarah laughed bitterly. "Plans? I can barely afford to patch the roof. I bought it so my daughter and I would have somewhere safe to live. Now I'm just trying to make it livable before winter." Michael was quiet for a long moment. "Then, what if you didn't have to do it alone?" Sarah turned to him, confused. "My family's foundation focuses on community development and historical preservation," he explained. "This building, what you've done here, it's exactly the kind of project we support. Turning spaces of hidden history into places of community healing." "I don't understand." "I'm offering to fund the renovation completely. In return, I want you to run it. Create what you envisioned: affordable housing, community spaces, maybe a small museum on the top floor about hidden histories and the importance of doing what's right." Sarah's knees went weak. "You're serious?" "You could have kept one painting," Michael said, "sold it quietly. No one would have known. Your daughter would have been set for life. Instead, you made a call that returned my family's heritage." "Yes, I'm serious." The renovation took 18 months. True to his word, Michael's foundation covered everything. But it wasn't just about money. The story had touched something in Millbrook. Neighbors who had barely noticed each other started working side by side. The hotel became the town's project. Emma had her own room now, the first time in her life. She'd painted the walls purple and hung pictures of the families who visited, calling them our friends who got their treasures back. Sarah turned the ground floor into community spaces: a daycare for working parents, a computer lab for kids, a commercial kitchen where neighbors taught cooking classes. The upper floors became apartments, priority given to single parents, elderly residents on fixed incomes, and families struggling to make ends meet. But it was the penthouse that became truly special. Sarah worked with the Holocaust Museum to create a permanent exhibit about hidden art, lost heritage, and the courage to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. The climate control systems that had preserved stolen art now protected photographs, documents, and stories of families reunited with their past. Vincent Harrington's preservation system had saved more than paintings. It had saved history. And in Sarah's hands, it became something more a reminder that one person's choice to do right could ripple through generations. The grand opening was on a crisp September day. The whole town turned out. The families whose art had been returned sent representatives. The Holocaust Museum sent a delegation. Even the FBI agent who'd overseen the art removal came back, this time with his family. Sarah stood on a makeshift stage in the lobby, Emma beside her in a new dress they'd bought for the occasion, the first new dress either of them had owned in years. "I bought this building because I was desperate," Sarah began, her voice carrying through the packed room. "I had $4,800 and a daughter who deserved better than a mouldy apartment. I thought I was just buying walls and a roof." She paused, looking out at the faces neighbors, strangers who'd become friends, families whose histories had intersected with hers in the most unexpected way. But buildings aren't just walls, they're stories. They hold our histories, the beautiful and the terrible. This hotel hid a dark secret that became a chance for healing. It reminded us that doing the right thing isn't about the reward. It's about recognizing that some things matter more than money. She glanced up at the restored ceiling, then back at the crowd. This place is for all of us now, for families who need homes, for children who need safe spaces, for a community that chose to come together instead of turning away, and for the memories of those who lost everything, whose treasures were hidden here until someone could finally do what was right. The applause started slowly, then built until it shook the chandeliers. But Sarah barely heard it. She was watching Emma, who stood tall beside her, beaming with pride. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Emma tugged on Sarah's hand. "Mama, are you happy we didn't keep the paintings?" Sarah knelt down to her daughter's level. "What do you think, baby?" Emma looked around the transformed hotel, at the children playing in the new community room, at old Ruth Goldstein Meyer teaching a young girl to play piano on the donated instrument, at their neighbors sharing food and stories. "I think," Emma said slowly, "that we got something better than money. We got a family, a really, really big family." Sarah pulled her daughter close, tears in her eyes. "Yeah, baby, we did." As the sun set over Millbrook, the Grandview Hotel stood illuminated against the darkening sky. No longer abandoned, no longer hiding secrets. It had become what buildings should be, a place where stories intersect, where communities gather, where the choice to do right creates ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could imagine. Sarah Chen had bought a crumbling hotel for $5,000 and discovered $180 million in stolen art. But what she'd really found was something priceless. The knowledge that integrity isn't about what you gain, but what you're willing to give up to make things right. 3 years had passed since that first phone call to the Holocaust Museum. The morning sun painted the hotel's restored facade gold as Sarah stood in her office, once the manager's quarters, now the heart of a thriving community centre. The walls were covered with photographs. Families reunited with their heritage, elderly residents who'd found affordable homes, children doing homework in the after-school program. She'd started with nothing but desperation and $4,812. Now she ran a place that housed 30 families, employed 15 people, and welcomed hundreds more each week for programs and services. The Holocaust Museum's travelling exhibits drew visitors from 3 states away. The Rothschild Foundation had committed to 20 years of funding. But it was the small things that mattered most. Emma helping elderly misses. Patterson, with her groceries, former homeless veterans, finding not just shelter, but dignity. The cooking classes, where Syrian refugees taught their recipes alongside Pennsylvania Dutch grandmothers. The hotel wasn't just restored, it was alive. Sarah picked up the framed letter that sat on her desk, one of dozens she'd received from around the world. This one was from the youngest Rosenberg descendant, a teenager in Israel. My great-great-grandmother's painting hangs in our living room now. Every Friday night, as we light Shabbat candles, its colors dance on our walls. You didn't just return art, you returned a piece of our souls. Thank you for choosing righteousness, when it would have been easier to choose riches. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Emma peeked in, now 10 years old and confident. Mom, the news people are here again. They want to interview you for the anniversary special. Tell them 5 minutes, Sarah said. Emma grinned. Also, Mr. Rothschild called. The foundation approved the expansion. We can build the medical clinic next door. After Emma left, Sarah walked to the penthouse one last time before the interview. The museum space was quiet, morning light streaming through windows that had once been sealed. She stood where she'd first seen the paintings, where she'd made the choice that changed everything. The wall now held a different kind of art, children's drawings from the after-school program, each one labelled with dreams. Doctor, teacher, artist. Mum, like Miss Sarah. The reporter was young, eager, probably hoping for a new angle on a well-worn story. Miss Chen, she began as the cameras rolled, you've been called a hero, a saint, an example of human goodness. How do you see yourself? Sarah thought for a moment. I'm a mom who needed a place to live and stumbled into someone else's unfinished business. I'm not special. I just did what felt right. But you gave up a fortune. No, Sarah interrupted gently. I gained one. It just doesn't fit in a bank account. The reporter pressed on. Any regrets? Surely there were moments when you wondered what if. Sarah smiled. Vincent Harrington, the man who hid those paintings, thought he was a coward. But his cowardice preserved something precious until the right moment. My desperation led me to that door. Everything lined up perfectly. I believe, Sarah said slowly, that sometimes life gives us tests disguised as opportunities. And who we really are shows in what we do when no one's watching, when we could get away with it, when doing right costs us everything. She looked directly at the camera. There are people watching this who are facing their own locked doors, their own moral choices. Maybe it's not stolen art. Maybe it's finding a wallet, or knowing about corruption at work, or having the chance to take advantage of someone vulnerable. The amount doesn't matter. The choice does. What would you tell them? That your integrity is worth more than any paycheck. That sleeping peacefully knowing you did right beats luxury bought with compromise. That your children are watching and learning what kind of person to become. And that sometimes, when you choose righteousness over riches, the universe finds other ways to reward you. The interview wound down. The reporter thanked her, packed up, moved on to the next story. But Sarah lingered in the penthouse, watching the town wake up below. Her phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Mom, Mrs. Kim's daughter just got into medical school. She says it's because of the tutoring program. She's crying happy tears in the lobby. Sarah smiled. Another life changed. Another ripple from that moment 3 years ago when she'd stood in this room and chosen justice over wealth. She headed back downstairs to her real treasure. A daughter proud of her mother, a community that had become family, and the knowledge that when tested, she'd proven money couldn't buy her soul. The transformation wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. But 6 months after Sarah made that first phone call, the hotel began to feel like something more than a building with a secret. The first challenge came on a grey November morning. Sarah was in the lobby, meeting with a contractor about the third-floor plumbing, when a black town car pulled up outside. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, followed by two others who looked less like assistants and more like security. "Miss Chen?" The man extended his hand. "My name is Richard Caldwell. I represent a private collector who's very interested in your recent discovery." Sarah shook his hand cautiously. "The art's already been returned to the families." Of course," Caldwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm actually here about the building itself. My client is prepared to offer you $2 million for the property. Cash. Close, in 30 days. Sarah blinked. $2 million? The hotel's become quite famous, hasn't it? People want to visit, see where the art was hidden. My client envisions a museum, perhaps a boutique hotel. You'd be free to walk away with more money than you'd see in 10 lifetimes of shift work." Sarah thought about the families she'd met. Ruth Goldstein Meyer, who'd wept in this very lobby. The Rosenberg grandson who'd told her his grandmother died believing their heritage was lost forever. The children, who now had tangible connections to ancestors they'd only known through stories. "I'm not selling," she said quietly. Caldwell's smile thinned. "Miss Chen, let me be direct. You're sitting on a property that's worth far more than you paid for it, but maintaining it, that will bankrupt you. No foundation money lasts forever. No news cycle stays interested indefinitely. In 2 years, you'll be struggling with the same bills you had before, except now you'll have a massive building you can't afford to heat. Then I'll figure it out." He leaned forward. $3 million. Final offer. That's generational wealth, Miss Chen. Your daughter could go to any college she wants. You'd never work another double shift. You could actually rest. And there it was, the heart of the temptation. Not greed, but exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of someone who'd been surviving instead of living for too long. Sarah thought about Emma doing homework by candlelight, about choosing which bill to pay each month, about the machine shop job that had destroyed her back and barely covered rent, about every single moment of the past 7 years when she'd felt like she was drowning. $3 million would mean air. "Mr. Caldwell," she said slowly, 6 months ago, I would have said yes. 6 months ago, I would have sold this building for $10,000 just to make the problem go away. So, what's changed?" She gestured around the lobby, at the walls she'd been repairing, at the chandelier that still needed rewiring, at the photographs she'd started hanging of the families who'd reclaimed their heritage. "I found out what it feels like to do something that matters, and I can't put a price on that." Caldwell stood, his expression hardening. "You're making a mistake. This building will consume you. The costs, the maintenance, the responsibility, you'll regret not taking this offer." "Maybe," Sarah said, "but I'd regret selling more." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the lobby for a long time. Her hands were shaking. $3 million. The number kept echoing in her head. She pulled out her phone and looked at her bank account. $1,200. The foundation's next grant wasn't due for 3 weeks. The heating bill was $800. "Mum?" Emma appeared on the stairs, school bag over her shoulder. "Are you okay?" Sarah looked at her daughter, 7 years old, wearing a coat she'd outgrown last winter, shoes that were held together with duct tape because new ones weren't in the budget. "Yeah, baby, I'm okay." "Who was that man?" "Someone who wanted to buy our hotel." Emma's eyes widened. "Are we selling?" And in that moment, Sarah saw 2 paths clearly. One led to comfort, security, the ability to give Emma everything she'd never been able to provide. The other led to more struggle, more uncertainty, more nights lying awake wondering how to make it all work. But only one path let her look her daughter in the eye and say, "We chose what mattered." "No," she said, pulling Emma close. "We're not selling. This is our home, and some things are worth more than money." Emma hugged her tight. "Good. I like it here." After Emma left for school, Sarah sat at the front desk and made a list. Everything the hotel needed, everything it would cost, everything she'd have to sacrifice to make this work. Then, she crumpled the list and threw it away. She'd figure it out. She always did. Because Caldwell was right about one thing, the hotel would consume her. It would take every ounce of energy, every dollar she could scrape together, every moment of rest she might have claimed. But it would give her something she'd never had before, a purpose bigger than survival. And that, she was beginning to understand, was worth everything. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table in their small apartment above the manager's office. The hotel creaked and settled around her, sounds she'd grown used to, but that still sometimes startled her awake. She pulled out a notebook and did the math. The Rothschild Foundation grant, $50,000 for the year, gone in 6 months, with basic repairs and utilities. Her part-time job at the machine shop, $1,200 a month, barely enough for food and Emma's school supplies. The hotel's heating bill for winter, estimated at $1,200 monthly. Property taxes due in spring, $8,000. Insurance renewal, $6,000. Roof repairs needed before next winter, $15,000 minimum. And that was just the beginning. Every day revealed new problems, cracked foundations, outdated electrical, plumbing that dated back to the 1920s. The building was beautiful, historic, meaningful. It was also a bottomless pit. Caldwell's offer, $3 million. She could pay cash for a house. A real house with working heat and windows that closed properly. Emma could have her own room, decorated however she wanted. They could buy clothes that fit, food without checking prices, maybe even take a vacation. Emma had never seen the ocean. Sarah could go back to school, finish the degree she'd abandoned when she got pregnant, maybe become a teacher like she'd always wanted. Give Emma a mother who wasn't exhausted all the time, who didn't smell like machine oil and desperation. $3 million was security, stability, the ability to breathe. But it was also walking away from 30 families who needed affordable housing. From the community spaces that were starting to bring neighbours together. From the museum that kept Vincent Harrington's story alive and honoured the families who'd lost everything. It was abandoning the promise she'd made to herself that she'd finally do something that mattered. Sarah thought about her own childhood. Her mother working 3 jobs, never around. Her father gone before she could remember. Growing up in apartments where the walls were thin and the rent was always late. Wearing donated clothes, eating free school lunches, watching other kids have things she could only imagine. She'd sworn Emma would have better. But what was better? Money? Or a mother who showed her that some things were worth more than comfort? Sarah remembered Emma's face when Ruth Goldstein Meyer had visited, the way her daughter had listened to stories about families torn apart, about treasures saved, about history reclaimed. The way Emma had said, with complete certainty, "I'm glad we didn't keep the paintings." At 7 years old, Emma already understood something that took most people a lifetime to learn, that meaning mattered more than money. But Emma was also wearing shoes held together with duct tape. She was also sleeping in a building that barely had heat. She was also growing up with a mother who was always tired, always stressed, always one emergency away from disaster. What kind of lesson was that? Sarah put her head in her hands. The truth was, she didn't know if she was being noble or just stubborn, if she was doing the right thing or using virtue as an excuse for pride. Maybe Caldwell was right. Maybe she was making a mistake. Maybe in 2 years she'd be even worse off than before, except now she'd have failed not just herself but all the people counting on her. The smart thing was to sell. Take the money. Give Emma the stability she deserved. Let someone else handle the hotel, someone with actual resources and experience. But then she thought about Vincent Harrington, who'd spent 40 years maintaining climate control systems on a building he never visited, preserving art he could never claim, waiting for someone brave enough to do what he couldn't. He hadn't chosen her because she was wealthy or educated or connected. He'd chosen her because he believed she'd do the right thing, even when it cost everything. And maybe that was the answer, not whether she could afford to keep the hotel, but whether she could afford morally, spiritually, to walk away. Sarah closed the notebook. The math didn't work. It would probably never work. She'd likely spend the rest of her life struggling to keep this building standing, sacrificing her own comfort for something bigger than herself. But Emma was watching, learning, becoming whoever she'd be. And Sarah wanted her daughter to grow up knowing that when faced with an impossible choice between comfort and meaning, her mother had chosen meaning. Even if it meant never being comfortable again. She turned off the light and went to bed, the decision made, even though doubt would return with the morning. Some choices you make once, others you make every single day. This would be the second kind. The call came 3 weeks later. Sarah was on a ladder in the lobby, replacing light bulbs in the chandelier, when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer unknown number, probably another creditor. But something made her climb down and swipe to accept. Miss Chen, this is Patricia Hoffman from the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Do you have a moment? Sarah sat on the bottom step of the grand staircase. Sure. We've been following your story, what you did with the artwork, your vision for the hotel. It's exactly the kind of project we exist to support. I'm calling to let you know that the Trust has voted to designate the Grandview Hotel as a site of national significance. That comes with a grant of $500,000 for restoration and an annual operating budget of $100,000 for the next 10 years. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. I don't understand. You're preserving more than a building, Miss Chen. You're preserving a story about integrity, about doing what's right when it costs everything. That's the kind of history that matters. The kind worth protecting. After the call ended, Sarah sat on the stairs for a long time, phone in her lap, unable to process what had just happened. $500,000. Enough to fix the roof, update the electrical, make the building truly safe and livable. And $100,000 a year, enough to actually run programs, hire staff, maybe even pay herself a modest salary. She'd been prepared to struggle, prepared to sacrifice, prepared to fail, even, if that's what choosing meaning over money meant. She hadn't been prepared for this. Mom? Emma's voice echoed from upstairs. Can I come down now? Sarah had made her daughter wait in their apartment during the ladder work, safety first always. Yeah, baby, come down. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, then ran down and launched herself into Sarah's arms. I finished my homework. Can we go to the library? Sarah held her daughter close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. In a minute. First, I need to tell you something. She explained about the phone call, about what it meant. Emma listened with the serious concentration she always gave to important matters. So we get to stay? Emma asked. We don't have to sell? We get to stay. We get to make this place everything we dreamed it could be. Emma hugged her tighter. I told you it would be okay. Yeah, baby, you did. That evening, Sarah called Michael Rothschild to thank him. She suspected his recommendation had influenced the Trust's decision. He confirmed as much. You gave my family's heritage back when you could have kept it, he said. Did you really think we'd let you struggle alone? I wasn't expecting anything. I know. That's why you deserve everything. After hanging up, Sarah walked through the hotel, room by room, seeing it with new eyes, the lobby that would become a community gathering space. The second-floor apartments that would house families. The third-floor classrooms where children would learn. The penthouse museum where Vincent Harrington's story would live forever. She'd bought this building for $5,000, thinking she was just buying shelter. She'd found $180 million in stolen art and given it all away. And now, not because she'd expected reward, but because she'd chosen right, she had the resources to build something that would last. Sarah understood now what Vincent Harrington had known, that integrity creates its own kind of wealth. Not always, not quickly, but sometimes, if you're lucky, the universe conspires to help those who help others. She pulled out her phone and called her mother for the first time in 2 years. The conversation was brief, awkward, but Sarah needed to say it. "You were wrong about me. I'm not a failure. I'm not a burden. I found something worth keeping, and I kept it." Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm glad, Sarah. I really am." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement, and that was enough. That night, Sarah tucked Emma into bed in their small apartment, knowing that soon they'd move into a real apartment in the restored section of the hotel. "Mama," Emma said, already half asleep, "I'm proud of you." "Why's that, baby?" "Because you didn't sell our hotel. Because you did what was right even when it was hard. Because you're my mum." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you too. Every single day." As she turned off the light and closed the door, Sarah realized something. She'd been wrong about what she'd found in this hotel. It wasn't the art. It wasn't the money that would eventually come. It wasn't even the building itself. It was the person she'd become when faced with an impossible choice. Someone who chose meaning over comfort. Someone who did right even when no one was watching. Someone her daughter could be proud of. And that was worth more than all the stolen art in the world. 5 years later, Sarah stood on the front steps of the Grand View Hotel, watching the sun rise over Millbrook. The building glowed in the golden light, fully restored, alive with purpose, a testament to what happens when someone chooses integrity over everything else. The numbers told one kind of story. 60 families had lived in the hotel's apartments over those 5 years. 32 children had graduated from the after-school program. The community kitchen had served over 15,000 meals. The job training center had helped 83 people find employment. The Penthouse Museum had welcomed visitors from 42 countries. But numbers couldn't capture the real transformation. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who'd lived alone in a one-room apartment, now taught knitting classes to young mothers every Tuesday. She'd found family in the hotel's community room. James Rodriguez, who'd been homeless for 3 years, now managed the hotel's maintenance department. He'd found dignity in honest work and a small apartment he could finally call his own. The Syrian family who'd arrived with nothing now ran the community kitchen, teaching cooking classes that brought together refugees and long-time residents. They'd found home in a town that had learned to welcome strangers. Emma, now 12 years old, volunteered at the museum on weekends. She'd grown up watching her mother choose meaning over money, and it had shaped who she was becoming, confident, compassionate, grounded in values that transcended wealth. The hotel had become what Sarah had envisioned that first day. Not just a building, but a community. A place where people who'd been written off by society found second chances. Where struggle transformed into strength. The foundation money had grown. The Rothschild Foundation's initial commitment had inspired others. The Holocaust Museum had established a permanent exhibit about Vincent Harrington's preservation efforts, with proceeds supporting the hotel. The National Trust grant had been renewed for another decade. Sarah earned a modest salary, now $40,000 a year, enough to live comfortably if not luxuriously. She'd bought a reliable car. Emma had new shoes that actually fit. They took small vacations, nothing extravagant, but meaningful. Last summer, they'd finally seen the ocean, but the real wealth was harder to quantify. It was the letters Sarah received from families whose relatives had reclaimed their stolen heritage. Thank you notes that still arrived, years later, from grandchildren who'd connected with ancestors through returned artwork. It was the documentary that had been filmed about the hotel, winning awards at film festivals, inspiring similar projects in 3 other cities. It was the speaking invitations Sarah received universities, conferences, community groups wanting to hear about the choice she'd made. Each time she told the story, she saw people's faces change. It was Emma's application essay for high school, which began, "My mother taught me that some things matter more than money." She proved it by giving away $180 million and becoming richer than she'd ever been. The hotel's success had brought unexpected opportunities. A publisher had offered Sarah $50,000 for a book about her experience. She'd donated it all to the hotel's scholarship fund. A movie producer had inquired about film rights. Sarah had declined, not wanting her story turned into entertainment that exploited the real family's pain. Several wealthy donors had tried to buy the hotel offers that now reached $10 million, $15 million, $20 million. Sarah turned them all down. The hotel wasn't for sale, it was for service. She'd learned something Vincent Harrington had known, that true wealth isn't what you accumulate, it's what you give away. This morning was special. Ruth Goldstein Meyer's family was visiting for the 5th anniversary of the day Sarah had made that first phone call. Ruth had passed away 2 years ago, but her children and grandchildren came annually to honor the woman who'd returned their family's heritage. They'd created a scholarship in Ruth's name, funding art education for children in the hotel's after-school program. The first recipient had just been accepted to the Rhode Island School of Design. Sarah watched as the family's cars pulled into the circular driveway. She thought about that day 5 years ago when she'd stood in the penthouse, surrounded by paintings worth a fortune, facing an impossible choice. She could have kept one. Just one. No one would have known. Emma's entire future could have been secured. But she would have known. And Emma would have learned that integrity had a price, that virtue was negotiable, that the right choice was only worth making when it was convenient. Instead, Emma had learned that her mother was someone who kept promises, someone who chose hard over easy, someone who understood that the most valuable inheritance isn't money, it's character. The family gathered in the lobby. Hugs were exchanged, stories were shared. Tears fell, as they always did, but happy tears now. Ruth's granddaughter approached Sarah, holding a small package. "My grandmother wanted you to have this. She left instructions that it should be given to you on today's date." Sarah opened it carefully. Inside was a small watercolor, not one of the valuable paintings, but something Ruth herself had painted. It showed the Grand View Hotel, restored and glowing, with people streaming through its doors. Beneath it, in Ruth's shaky handwriting, "You didn't just return our art. You showed us that goodness still exists. Thank you for being brave enough to do what was right." Sarah's vision blurred with tears. This moment, this community, this legacy was worth more than all the money she'd given away. Because she hadn't really given anything away at all. She'd invested it in something that would last forever. Proof that integrity still mattered, that courage still existed, that one person's choice to do right could change the world. And that return was priceless. 10 years after Sarah Chen bought a crumbling hotel for $5,000, she stood in the Penthouse Museum, looking at a photograph of herself from that first day, young, exhausted, desperate. A woman who'd thought she was just buying shelter. She barely recognized that person anymore. Emma was 17 now, preparing for college. She'd been accepted to 6 universities with full scholarships, not because of her mother's story, but because of who she'd become. A girl who'd grown up watching integrity in action, who understood that character mattered more than comfort. The hotel had grown beyond Sarah's wildest dreams. The model had spread to 8 other cities, communities learning that abandoned buildings could become centers of transformation. That doing what's right could inspire others to do the same. Sarah had been invited to speak at the United Nations about art repatriation. She'd testified before Congress about affordable housing solutions. She'd won awards she'd never heard of, recognition she'd never sought. But the moment she returned to, again and again, was that day in the penthouse, standing surrounded by $180 million in stolen art, facing a choice that would define everything that came after. She could have kept it all, could have justified it, Vincent Harrington had left it to her, hadn't he? She'd bought the building legally. The art was hers. But it wasn't. Not really. And choosing to return it, choosing righteousness over riches, integrity over comfort, had set in motion a chain of events that proved something she'd always hoped was true, but never knew for certain. That goodness begets goodness. That the universe, sometimes, rewards those who do right, not because they expect reward, but because they can't live with themselves otherwise. Sarah had learned the difference between wealth and riches. Wealth was money in the bank. Riches was Emma's laughter echoing through the hotel corridors. Wealth was a comfortable retirement account. Riches was Mrs. Patterson hugging her every Tuesday after knitting class. Wealth was financial security. Riches was knowing she'd changed lives, saved legacies, proved that integrity still existed in a cynical world. She thought about all the people who'd told her she was foolish, who'd said she should keep at least one painting, who'd called her naive, idealistic, stupid. They'd been wrong. Not because everything had worked out perfectly, it hadn't. There had been hard years, doubt-filled nights, moments when she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But she'd never once wished she'd chosen differently, because the person she'd become by choosing right was worth more than all the comfort she'd sacrificed. Because Emma had grown up with a mother who kept her promises, because 60 families had found homes, because art had been returned to people who'd lost everything, because one man's 40-year act of preservation had finally found its purpose. The hotel would outlast her, the legacy would continue, and somewhere, decades from now, someone would stand in this penthouse and read about the single mother who'd given away a fortune and became rich beyond measure. They'd learn that integrity isn't a transaction, that doing right doesn't guarantee reward, that sometimes you sacrifice everything and receive nothing but the knowledge that you did what you could with what you had. But they'd also learn that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the universe conspires to help those who help others. That courage can be contagious. That one person's choice to do right can change countless lives. Sarah Chen had bought a hotel with her last $5,000 and found $180 million in stolen art. But what she'd really discovered was something no amount of money could buy: the knowledge that she was someone who chose right, even when it cost everything. And that made her the richest person she knew. Did Sarah's story make you believe that integrity can change everything? That sometimes the hardest choices lead to the greatest rewards? If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. It helps more people discover stories that remind us what really matters in life. Drop a comment below and tell us, could you have made the same choice Sarah did? Could you have given away $180 million? Be honest, we want to hear your truth. And if you want more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary moral choices, stories that will make you think differently about wealth, integrity, and what it means to live a meaningful life, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because tomorrow we have another incredible story that will challenge everything you think you know about doing the right thing. Trust us, you won't want to miss it.